Hello, I'm Susan Ward. Welcome or welcome back to my channel and the William Lilly project. In this short video, I'll show you the horary chart that I promised to show you in the last video. I think it's very funny, and I'm sure Lilly did too, which is why we have the outcome. Most of his charts have few or no comments, but I've selected those where he does note an answer as well as the question in most cases. There's no special order for these videos, and they'll be numbered consecutively just for ease of reference. I'll explain those charts using Lilly's primer, Christian Astrology, as a guide to the technical matters. However, that won't necessarily be the case every time. There will be those of you who want to recalculate these charts using computer software. Sometimes the results will be very similar, sometimes not. Please remember that it is only very recently that we've had easy access to accurate timekeeping. Some may remember having to use the speaking clock, whereby for a fee you could telephone a number, Tim, and hear the recorded time. At the third stroke, it will be 10:45 precisely, and then followed by 3 pips or strokes. Listening to the radio was another way of accessing the correct time. In most cases, the wristwatch would be fast or slow of the actual time, and you would make allowances for that once you'd worked out which your watch was. However, getting an accurate time wasn't always straightforward, and we need to remember that. William Lilly had a watch seemingly with both hour and minute hands, very expensive. And this is suggested by his time notations, for example, 6:41 p.m. Presumably, he could check its accuracy against the local church clock or by the ringing of church bells at certain hours. This was how most people adjudged time, and although serving an important function, those timepieces could also be inaccurate. So we should not be surprised when astrological calculations which depend upon time are sometimes inaccurate. Having examined many hundreds of Lilly's charts, it's clear that an inaccurate calculation made little or no difference to his judgment of that chart. In most cases, he would know that he needed to make allowances for any inaccuracies. Additionally, the tables astrologers relied upon were often inaccurate too. Astrologers knew this and so would have needed to make allowances for that as well. The need for accurate and standardized timekeeping was driven by the advent of the railways and rail travel. So you can see it's quite recent. The modern obsession with accurate timekeeping is new. And somehow people in the past managed for a very long time without the atomic clock. To sum up, a chart is not made worthless by an inaccurate calculation, and I hope that the following demonstrations will highlight that. Now, I've cropped out Lily's notes because, like Lily, I like to tell a story, and I want to give you a chance to examine the chart before I give my commentary. On each slide, I've included the aspect moieties, the daily motions, and Ptolemy's table of dignities for your convenience. So, the first chart is for 16th of February, 1646, Julian calendar, at 7:10 p.m. in London, and please understand that they didn't have longitude as we understand it. The ascendant is 29 degrees Virgo, and it's very unusual for Lilly to use a chart with a later ascendant, so we might reasonably assume that there was a reason for him not to care. The name of the querent is Rollston, which Lilly had written backwards to provide some privacy to the client. The question is about lost treasure, and Lilly reports that it had been buried in the garden. As is usually the case, he's noted the moon's separation and application in the centre of the chart square. In this case, the moon separates from a square of Venus and applies to a square of Saturn, which perfects after the moon changes sign. Buried treasure is a matter for the fourth house, and doctrine can be found in Christian astrology, pages 215 to 218. We might also want to consider the second house if it is known that the treasure belongs to the querent. We can't be sure of the exact context of this question, which Lilly advises is needed to correctly judge the matter. But since he notes that the treasure was buried in the garden, it is reasonable to assume that the querent buried it or had it buried. Therefore, we can examine the second paragraph on page 215. And this is what he has to say, loosely speaking, but quoting, "If the querent hid his own treasure on his land or in his house, but has forgotten where." We don't know that he's forgotten. Perhaps he's gone to its hiding place and discovered that it was missing. But anyway, we have to look at the sign of the second house and its ruler. Libra is on the second cusp and is ruled by Venus. The sign of and quarter of the heavens, where that is placed, will give us a location. Venus is in detriment in the southern quadrant. That's the 10th house to the 7th. Now we have to look at the sign of the fourth. That Sagittarius is on the fourth cusp, which is ruled by Jupiter, and its sign and quarter of heaven. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini in the eastern quarter. Now, Jupiter is within 5 degrees of the 10th house cusp and is counted as being in the 10th house, which would place it in the eastern quadrant. Being on the cusp of a quadrant, we might allow for this southerly direction too. If the rulers of the second and fourth houses are in angles, then the treasure is still on the property. Jupiter, ruler of the fourth, is angular, but it is in detriment and is the ruler of the unfortunate sixth house. Jupiter is the greater benefic, but here is too weak to hold great promise of restoration. Venus, the lesser benefic, is also placed in the sign of its detriment and in the unfortunate 8th house. Quoting, "If these planets are not in angles but are in fortunes, without dignities, and either in the 4th or 7th houses, then either part or all of it has been removed." End quote. Although Jupiter is angular, its weakened position and its rulership of the unfortunate 6th make it an infortune in this chart. Likewise Venus. Neither conforms strictly to the latter aphorism, but when added to the very late position of the ascendant and the late degree of the moon, we might well deduce that there is little or any treasure to be found. These late degree positions suggest lateness or endings of one sort or another. When the context is one of loss, restoration is limited. There is also an argument that late degrees rising indicates deceit, and you'll find that in volume 3 of my book of sources when it's released. He quotes Al-Kindi's general rule on page 218. Quoting, "If there is a fortune in any angle, say there is treasure on the ground and that the thing hid is still in the ground. The quantity, price, esteem thereof shall be according to the potency, virtue, or debility of the fortune, end quotation. Jupiter is in the 10th, but it is debilitated, is an infortune and weak. Thus it shows the same regarding the hidden treasure. On page 299 of Christian Astrology, aphorism 17, Lilly writes, if the fortunes signify anything, and are cadent or ill-placed in dignities, or behold not the ascendant, or are retrograde, then are they impedited and shall perform little, if not received. Although Jupiter isn't cadent and does aspect the ascendant, it conforms otherwise, as does Venus almost completely. There's something unusual going on here. There's no clear evidence of theft, but the treasure isn't in its proper place. So the astrologer has to work out what has happened. Although the first cusp signifying the event is still just about in Virgo, most of the first house is in Libra, giving Venus part rulership of him and rulership of his second house of possessions. We might accept this as an identification between the two houses, which further reinforces the concept that the treasure never left his possession. We could extend this argument to the fourth house of buried treasure, where for all but 1 degree, Saturn rules. So although the Jupiter rulership suggested a sizable value, bearing in mind its position in detriment, Saturn impoverishes, making the treasure worthless. Perhaps we can support this with Venus, ruler of the second house, in detriment in Aries and in the 8th house of someone else's pocket. Lilly recounts the outcome in Latin. I'm sure you've guessed this already, where he writes that the querent himself took and spent the treasure. He adds that the querent was a tailor, a drunken man of dark colouring, that is, his complexion. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised at this, since Venus is partly his significator and associates with alcohol and pleasure. It seems that Master Ralston was so drunk that he'd forgotten that he had retrieved and taken away the treasure. We might conjecture that it wasn't his, or entirely his, to take, and perhaps that asking a question in this way might have lifted suspicion from him. It's very strange and very funny. I prefer to think that Master Ralston had simply been so drunk when he retrieved the treasure that he'd forgotten. And I believe that we have this story because Lilly wanted to remember it for future retellings at dinner. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and has perhaps raised questions. Please join me in the next video where I'll show you another chart from Lilly's collection. Thank you very much. Goodbye.